is my first Forensics Committee chair, Forensics Committee meeting as the chair of Forensics, and welcome to this afternoon's session. As part of the introduction, what I want to do is I want to explain that if I drop off the call, what we'll do is we'll maybe give it a minute or so, and it's possible I will drop off because I've had internet problems, and Colette and we'll let attendees know that I'm missing. And then if I don't make it back within a minute, I'll ask Fiona if she could step into the breach and take over as chair until I can manage to either get back via Teams or ring in. Fiona's with us, and Katharina and Fiona are both new members of the committee, so welcome to the Forensics Committee. I hope you learn a lot, or you will learn a lot, and I hope you enjoy your time in the Forensics Committee. We've got apologies from ACC Malcolm Graham. We've got quite a number of attendees. I think we've got ACC Beck Smith, CDIO Andrew Hendry, DCS Laura Waddle, and CS Gordon McCready attending, so welcome to all of you. We also have a late paper, which is item 21. It's the Forensic Toxicology Oversight Group. It's an update from that meeting that was held last week on the 4th of August. And thank you to Eleanor and Colette for turning that around very quickly. So without further ado, can I move on then to declarations of interest? I don't think I've missed anything, Colette, have I?
No, you're fine, Chair.
Grand, thank you. Move on to declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interests to declare, particularly any members of the board? Not picking up any? Grand. Okay, that then moves us on to the minute and the meeting of the Forensics Committee held on the 25th of April, and therefore they're there for approval. So can we agree those as a correct record? There's only 2 members of the Forensics Committee currently on it that were there. So is that a correct record, guys? Yeah. Caroline, is that? I can see Jane, but I can't see Caroline. So I'm taking
fine
that.
For me, Chair.
Grand. Okay, that's a relief. Okay, thanks. If we agree that then moves us on to item 1.5, which is, I beg your pardon, item 1.4, which is the action log and the matters arising. Now, we've got 6 proposed actions for closure and 2 actions that are ongoing. So if we can just have a quick look at those, bear with me. So can we agree to close the 6? Any dissent there? The 2 ones that are ongoing, anything you want to add to those, Fiona?
Nothing that I haven't added to the comments in the actions, Paul.
Yeah. Any questions about those? Okay. None. If we can note those then, and then we'll move on then to item 1.5, which is the decision to take business in private for items 12 to 19, and actually 12 to 21, I think it is. So can we agree? Can we agree to do that? Okay, thanks for that. That then moves us on to the Director of Forensic Services report, item 2. And I'll pass over to the Director, Fiona Douglas, to introduce her report. So Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So a number of areas to highlight for the preceding few months since the last committee meeting. A particular amount of time and energy has been taken by the senior management team in Forensic Services with regards to drugs, driving, toxicology, casework, and the issues within this part of Forensic Services. This led up to and beyond the authority meeting where I provided the information that unfortunately 386 drugs, driving, toxicology cases were unable to progress to prosecution as they'd exceeded the statutory time limit. and there is a significant amount of work ongoing within forensic services and across our partners, particularly in Police Scotland and the Crown Office, in terms of managing the ongoing risk around the drugs driving casework. And I know that we'll come on to talk about that in various papers in the committee meeting today. Moving on, I'm very pleased to announce that the senior management team restructure within forensic services has now been completed. That follows a period of consultation and a lot of discussion that had happened with the previous director of forensic services had started. So it's really pleasing that that process has now concluded and appointments have been made. And a number of those people are around the table in their new roles today. So I'd like to congratulate them all on their new posts. I'm very much looking forward to working with them all moving forward. And I think we've got a really strong senior management team within forensic services following on from that restructure and building on a lot of the good work that had been done up to that point. With regards to further recruitment that's ongoing, following approval at the JNCC, the Joint Negotiating Consultative Committee at the end of June, Forensic Services is now in the process of advertising a number of posts as part of the implementation of our new operating model. It is a significant amount of recruitment activity, and we're really looking forward to encouraging and attracting candidates into a range of roles across forensic services. A lot of opportunities internally within the organisation for staff to progress into different roles that have been identified through the development of the new operating model. And I think that will stand forensic services in really good stead around delivering the improvements that are set out within the new operating model business case. Very pleased to welcome the Cabinet Secretary for Justice to the new Junction 24 Postmortem Toxicology Laboratory that's in the process of being set up in Glasgow. It was a very interesting meeting. A lot of discussions were held, and Mr. Brown was toured through the facilities, including the laboratory areas and the new instrumentation that is in the process of being set up. And again, we'll hear more about the progress of that project as we progress through the meeting today. Then finally, there is attached a draft of the equality, diversity and inclusion strategy that's been developed within forensic services. So that has been extensively discussed with staff representative groups and staff within forensic services and managers, and also diversity staff associations. So a lot of good work has been done on that, and I'll be seeking views of the Forensic Services Committee members to progress that hopefully through to a paper at the next committee meeting so that we can look to approve that strategy for implementation. So that's all of the areas that I wanted to highlight within my report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks very much for that, Fiona. Can I firstly add my congratulations to the new management team on their promoted posts and wish them all the very best. We all want them to succeed in these posts, so well done. Can I throw it open to board members? Are there any questions on the director's paper? Jane.
Yes, thank you. I mean, you touched on it here, and I think we'll come back to it on a number of occasions, but just for clarity, 41 new posts is really quite a lot of new posts. And maybe want to think about for when we come to how many of those are change managers, how many of those are project managers, how many of those are, which might be considered as time limited or project specific, as opposed to permanent posts. And it becomes relevant, I think, as we move through. And as I recall from last committee, I think there were 14 change managers, but I don't know if you've got those statistics at your fingertips.
I can confirm that none of those posts relate to change. They're all scientific or support posts within forensic services. Some of them may be temporary and some of them will be permanent. The majority of those are permanent posts. So they're new in the context of the operating model. So they're redesigned roles that have different responsibilities, different activities within them in comparison with existing roles in the organisation. So that's been through the consultation process, which we're coming shortly to the end of. So a good proportion of those posts I would expect to be filled internally through internal movement within the organisation, but none of them relate to professional change roles. That is resource that is provided as part of the service back arrangement from Police Scotland to Forensic Services. So we wouldn't recruit those into our establishment.
Thank you. That's very helpful, because I think we will come back to that support provided in respect of change. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to add to that, are these 41 over and above the current establishment?
Vicky, can I ask you to just jump in and help me out with that one, please?
Yes, thanks, Fiona. Yes, they are. As the full business case within the operating model project outlined a number of new posts within the organisation. So as Fiona's articulated there, yes, 41 support and scientific roles.
And they are budgeted for?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, that's fine. Caroline.
Thanks, Chair. And actually, that was going to be my question. And thanks, Fiona, for your report. No, it's fine. And congratulations on the new management team, and too wish you all well in your new roles. And I guess it was really just around that, because flat cash obviously has a big impact on our business going forward. And so it was just double checking that we have the budget for all these new roles going forward. That was my first question. My second question was really around the report itself, because you now see an awful lot more data in there in terms of charts and things, which I think is great. It was just a few of them, and it's more just a comment for going forward. A few of them, unless you have really kind of in-depth knowledge, which I don't, it's quite hard to understand the trends and everything. So I just wondered if there could be slightly more narrative with some of them going forward. But that was great. I love seeing that, because actually giving that snapshot view, but maybe just a wee bit more narrative would make it just help your understanding a bit more. But thank you.
So this is the which report? This is the director's report, and this quality strategy, or
it's the director's report.
Yeah. Okay. Fiona, I don't know if there's anything you want to come back on there.
Yeah, just two things. Caroline, I agree with regards to the performance report and some of the additional information that's in there. I think that we're trying to develop the performance reporting quarter on quarter, and I think we've a way to go in terms of making sure that that's fit for purpose, and I'm sure we'll come on and discuss how that fits with the performance framework discussions as well. With regards to the budget, I'm very cognizant of the risks around the flat cash settlement for next year, and I have discussed that with the accountable officer, and we will be having a workshop later on this month to discuss the impact of that on the new operating model project in particular. So there are further discussions ongoing around the recruitment and the roles which we need to bring into the organisation, and what the impact of any changes to that will be.
Right, thank you. Thanks for that.
Grand. Fiona McQueen.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Fiona, for your report, echoing some of Caroline's thoughts about the data and narrative and analysis would be helpful. I'm just checking, Chair, that this is the appropriate point in the meeting to comment on the equality and diversity strategy.
I was hoping you would, yes, because if you weren't, I was going to.
Okay. So obviously it's great to see. So I'm interested in a number of things, Fiona, in terms of helping to understand, where it links across either Police Scotland, but also the rest of the authority. And for me, I would have hoped for, and maybe a bit more granular. So some of what are the protected characteristics within forensic services? So yes, there's the overall aim in terms of embracing equality and diversity, but are there key areas that you would look to see? And that's, I think, where I'm thinking back to the authority. So if it's about flexible working, if it's about those with protected characteristics having the right support, so the LGBTQI community, for instance. So in practical terms, it wasn't clear to me. So yes, there was a lot of background about why we need to do it, and of course, and it's great to see that commitment, but actually in practical terms, What do we think it's going to look like? What are the key challenges for you there?
Thank you, Fiona. I think the equality, diversity and inclusion strategy for forensic services was an action through the subgroup of our people board. We have an ED&I subgroup, which is very active, very enthusiastic and motivated to make progress in this area. And I think it's really pleasing to see that. I think I'm really keen to capture the feedback from members so that we can incorporate that into the final version of the strategy, which we'll seek to bring back hopefully to the next Forensic Services Committee, or perhaps the one beyond that, so that we can take into account the really valuable feedback that you can all provide, and also make sure that we've got some clear indicators in there around areas that we seek to make improvement and how we intend to track our progress against that. So very much an opening of the conversation, so we're really keen to catch up with you all to get your further feedback.
Fiona, is there anything more on this you want?
No, I think I think as just Fiona said, I think the indicators to the what, by when, how are we going to measure it, how are we going to track progress, and in particular, how do we know that the action that's been taken actually is going to get the desired result?
Yeah, thanks for that. Now I've got Caroline and Jane's hands still up. Are they legacies?
Legacies, apologies, Chair.
But Jane's isn't. So Jane.
Well, it's a legacy insofar as could I revert to the previous topic, and I apologise for being confused, but at 2.5 you're saying that Forensic Services is now in the process of advertising 41 new posts, and then I thought I understood from what you were saying about having a meeting and a workshop later this month that was in respect of those 41 posts, or is it other posts? In other words, it's possible, given the financial situation, that you might have to review those 41, or can you just tie those two together for me?
So I need, as director, to understand the broader position across Police Scotland and SPA as a corporate body, to fully understand how Forensic Services sits in and amongst that as part of the wider policing budget, and that's part of that discussion. We have so far advertised, I think, about half of the 41 posts.
Okay.
Prior to making any appointments, we need to be clear that any decision that is made on the recruitment this financial year doesn't create an unacceptable pressure on next year's budget.
Next year and beyond, but yes, okay,
yes.
That's helpful, thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Jane. I've got just a couple of questions also about the equalities. So Police Scotland have developed a strategy on this. Is there any linkage in there, so we're not reinventing the wheel with principles? Also, I'm interested in engagement with stakeholders, and how far have you got with that? And lastly, was about whether this was a strategy for approval, but you've kind of hinted that it's something we're going to have some coming back on in future. So what linkage is there with Police Scotland, with SPA's equality strategies?
Perhaps ask Alistair Patience to come in and provide an answer to that, given that he has done the lion's share of the work on the document to date.
Welcome, Alistair. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, we've linked in quite heavily with the Police Scotland strategy and innovation team in relation to the development of the strategy. We've had some close engagement, really good engagement, and really positive feedback with them from them. So in terms of the feedback, we've incorporated everything that was suggested there. So I don't recall seeing the Police Scotland's strategy, but I would imagine the alignment would be very good between them, considering the link with the strategy and innovation team. So I will get my hands on a copy just to make sure there is that strong alignment, but it's a point well made. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So any other questions on this? And of course, the big ticket issues of forensic toxicology will come back to, because there are papers elsewhere on the agenda, so we'll flesh that out in a lot more depth at that point. I should have said to board members that earlier. Okay, if we can then move on to item number 3, which is Forensic Services Performance Report Quarter 1. And I think that's the director again. I'm going to call you Fiona Douglas, the director, and Fiona McQueen, Fiona, and don't take that as being unfriendly. It's just I was at a school where there was 6 Pauls and a Paula in the class. So so any port in a storm. So director, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So taking into account the comments already made with regards to the data within the performance report, we are continuing to strive to make the report to provide as much useful information to the Forensic Services Committee as possible. So we will add further narrative around some of these, the charts and data in future reports. This report, however, highlights Forensic Services performance for Q1 of this financial year. With the exception of biology and the volume crime unit and drugs, there's been a reduction in demand across many areas of forensic services in comparison with the previous quarter. Caseload within drugs, mark enhancement and toxicology are still higher than I would like, and there are specific actions in place within these areas to reduce the caseload over the coming months. Toxicology, as we've already referred to, continues to be a cause for concern, and there are many specific actions in place to address the backlog of work in this area, and that will be discussed at various different points within this meeting. At section 3.3, the charts demonstrate the laboratory capacity in comparison with the demand for casework across those individual areas over the previous 3 months. And again, this further demonstrates the challenge of toxicology demand versus the available capacity within this area of forensic services. At 3.4, the demand and the output is set out for each of the key units within forensic services, and it shows biology output in particular, including volume crime, has been high over the previous quarter, with the majority of other areas tracking as expected. So the output across the different areas of forensic services is what we would expect it to be. At 3.5 within the report shows some further information with regards to toxicology, and the charts show the number of cases completed and the average age of those cases since December of 2021 for section 5A toxicology. There are more detailed reports that have been discussed and reviewed within the toxicology oversight group and other forums with regards to the toxicology performance within forensic services. At 3.6, the scene examination update shows that the performance in attending scenes within 24 hours continues to track near to the target of 80%. Currently, it's running at 85% during Q1, with a particularly strong performance in the north. At 3.7, the quality management system and accreditation summary shows the status of our current accreditation and also highlights that during this period there's been 1 instance of negative feedback raised and 22 instances of positive feedback. During August this month, the customer survey will be issued, which is what we tend to do every 2 years to check the feedback on forensic services performance from Police Scotland, the Crown Office and PERC. And it would be intended that the results of that survey will be reported back to the Forensic Services Committee. At section 4, the absence data shows there is an upward trend of absence across forensic services. However, it is in line with the wider Police Scotland absence rate. We do have a subgroup of our people board which is constantly focused on reasons for absence and looking at opportunities for us to provide increased support in the right areas to look to reduce levels of absence across the organisation. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions on the performance report.
Grant, thanks very much. Do we have any questions from board members on the performance report? Fiona.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies. Probably being a new member, I'll be asking questions that I'll know and understand then next time. I had Excuse me. Fiona, I had 2 or 3 questions. I'll maybe do them one at a time. So under the accreditation, is there anything to worry about there in terms of accreditation not being continued within the laboratories, or is that routine normal churn of what's happening?
There's a routine schedule of works associated with maintenance of accreditation and re-accreditation. It works on a 4-year cycle. So we have back and forth transfer of information and documentation between forensic services and UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, in order to maintain our accreditation on an annual basis. And there are sometimes some delays within specific areas of that, where we've got different technical assessors from UCAS involved in different parts of the accreditation. It's a large scale exercise, so there's no cause for concerns in and amongst the annual accreditation of forensic services. We are continuing to work with UCAS with regards to the challenges within toxicology around the Section 4 and Section 5A analysis, and we have UCAS attending our Howden Hall laboratory this Thursday to do a further additional review with regards to accreditation for that particular area.
Well, we're expecting accreditation to continue.
We have a number of challenges with regards to toxicology accreditation, in that there has been a recent publication of additional guidance with regards to the application of the international standard to toxicology analysis. That poses some particular challenges around additional work that needs to be done to demonstrate compliance with that additional guidance. So we'll be discussing that with UCAS on Thursday. There are some areas where there's a challenging amount of work to be done, alongside the need to continue to mitigate the risk of cases that are unable to proceed to prosecution. So it's a careful balance in terms of how we utilise our resources in that area.
That's great. Thanks, Fiona. Can I take you to the scene examination, the forensic services, and 85% of scenes attended within 24 hours, 87% of violent and sexual crime, 8% national. It's not clear to me whether 90% is the standard or 80% is the standard of attendance. So page 11.
Yeah, we have a key performance indicator with Police Scotland as part of the existing Memorandum of Understanding, where we should attend scenes within 90% of scenes within 24 hours of the incident being reported, and that's what we endeavour to achieve. There are some various different challenges across different parts of the country, and we, by and large, run, I would say, between 85 and 90% as our routine level of performance, although quite often it's higher than that in the major and serious incidents where our response is much faster.
So the KPI of 90% is what you would be expecting all or almost all of the time?
In 90% of incidents, we would expect to be there within 24 hours. That's what we aim to do.
And do we? And again, apologies. It may well be that there's other times for discussion on this, but the document here has Q1. Is there a time when we see a longer period, so we can have a better sense of improvement, deterioration, standing still?
Yes, there are. I mean, there's a number of reasons why we can attend scenes over the 24-hour period. It could be that the household is unavailable for the scene examiner to be able to access the property. It could be that the scene examiner attends the property, but they're unable to undertake that examination. So there are a variety of reasons within that data around whether or not we're able to attend within the 24-hour period. And unfortunately, at this particular point, it's not possible to pull that into the management information report. That's some of the improvements that we're seeking to make within the scenes deployment part of our evidence management system.
That's helpful, thanks. And then the last thing was on, and you touched on it yourself in terms of staff support. So I was interested if you had a sense of roughly, obviously we would want everyone to be well enough to be at their work, but that doesn't happen. So roughly what is what would be an anticipated 4, 5, 6, 7% absence from work, and I'd be interested in particularly the psychological support in terms of occupational health that your staff receive.
Sure. So with regards to the psychological support, I think that's a really important area that we've been focusing a lot of effort at, particularly given that across forensic services, the job that we ask our staff to do is very difficult. And it can involve repeated exposure to traumatic incidents over periods of time. So it does come with a toll on people from a psychological perspective, and we have seen some increases around formal diagnosis of PTSD, but other issues and impact on mental health as a result of work. We are in the process of setting up a pilot, just gone through the tender process for the support to allow this to happen, where we're looking at having proactive psychological supervision built into professional practice. And I think this will be quite a huge step forward. So we're helping people not to break rather than trying to fix them once they're broken. So this is something that we are keen to roll out, particularly with our frontline scene examination staff, so that they have routine, proactive support from an appropriately trained professional body to support that. I think that will make a big difference. There are other areas of mental health and psychological disorders that I think we need to also focus effort on. We're an organisation that's been going through a huge period of change. We've been going through organisational change consultation since November of last year, and that has certainly also taken its toll on our staff.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much indeed. And do you have a sense yet of roughly how many people will be off sick percentage-wise at any one time, so that for planning purposes you'll know to expect that?
Yeah, I haven't got the figure for you right now. I think we need to think post-COVID what we expect that absence level to be. I think it would be naive to think that we can reduce it back to pre-COVID. But I think we also need to challenge ourselves on what we should set as our expected level of absence long-term and short-term, so that we are appropriately putting actions in place. We do have the discussions within our people board on a monthly basis to make sure that we're looking at the data in detail. And I think the people board would be the place where we should set that target and then monitor our progress against it.
No, I think that's really important, Fiona. I'm really assured by what you're saying. It'll be interesting to see that as coming through in terms of that ongoing psychological supervision, the proactive bit. And I think also the evidence, as we have an aging workforce, and people are working much longer than, what once was an attainable level of sickness absence possibly isn't. And as you also say, if people have long COVID, there's many other areas. So actually taking a reflective look on what we think is achievable is really encouraging. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much for those, Fiona. I've got Caroline next, but I noticed, Brian, you've got your hand up. Were you wanted to come in on a specific point that Fiona had raised?
Yes, thanks, Paul. Yeah,
Well, I'll take you just now then.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Hey, hi, Fiona. It was just to probe a little bit more on the UCAS visit on Thursday. And I was just wondering if there was any plans, or could you expand upon if, for example, accreditation was taken away? Do you have any plans in respect of that, in relation to how work will continue?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. So we have detailed plans around what UCAS are expecting to see within the laboratory on Thursday this week. We've also provided them with a large amount of information over the past few weeks, so that they can prepare for that visit and be fully cited on all of the work that has been going on. UCAS are particularly interested to see the plan around the reduction of the age of the backlog and the number of cases within the backlog for analysis within this part of the organisation. Clearly, we're all concerned about the timeliness of cases and ensuring that there are no further cases that do fail to progress to prosecution, but we also need to be mindful of the impact that delay can have on the scientific results within these types of cases. And I think one of the key areas that we'll be discussing with UCAS is around how stable samples are. So these are the blood samples that are taken, how stable those blood samples are over time, and the evidence that we do have around that. So we'll be discussing that with UCAS on Thursday. I have written to Police Scotland and to the Crown with regards to the potential risk around suspension of our accreditation in this area if we're unable to provide sufficient reassurance to UCAS on Thursday. And we will work with our partners in Police Scotland and the Crown at what the impact of that will be. What I would stress, though, is that there are areas of forensic science that are accredited and those that are not. We have an extensive scope of accreditation within forensic services, but it's not all parts of the organisation that are accredited. If our accreditation is suspended, we would hope that would be for a short period of time to allow us then to address any gaps associated with the introduction of the new guidance for the application of the international standard. And we would work closely with UCAS to get that reinstated at the earliest opportunity. So we have, as I said, provided a lot of information to UCAS, and we will have the discussions with them on Thursday. If there are any outstanding concerns that they have, we will work together with them to put plans in place to address those.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. Just one other, just for a slight bit of clarity then. Would business continue on Friday as per normal, or alternatively, maybe don't need to go into the detail of any plans, would they all work, for example, be outsourced if, you know, if that was the case?
So we need to work with the Crown Office in particular with regards to the potential of any suspension of accreditation. Again, I would re-emphasise that the standard of the work produced by forensic services is the same as it has been since accreditation was gained when the legislation went live. And we have internal quality assurance and an entire forensic services management system that demonstrates the quality of the work that is produced. So we will need to work with our partners to be able to fully answer that question, Brian, at this particular point in time.
No, I appreciate that. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks for that, Brian. I'd got Caroline next, but your hand has disappeared.
Yeah, that's because all my questions have been answered by Fiona and Brian. Thanks.
Oh, congrats. Okay, Jane.
Thank you. I was just thinking, moving from the particular to the general, as it were, if that's a new publication on guidance from UCAS, what's the sort of timeline? You know, in other words, how long has that been in the offing, and are there others? I mean, because this is again about being upstream, about prevention rather than reaction. I mean, I assume it didn't just come out last month. So what's the lead-in time, and are you aware of further publications, further guidance which has been published or which might be published in other areas?
I'll ask our head of quality, Craig, to come in and answer that question, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Chair. Jane, thank you for the question. First of all, the Lab 51 document came out in May 2021. UCAS had a very, very short time where they were looking for compliance to the document, and there was a lot of discussion with UCAS at the time regarding the gap analysis that forensic services performed to show the amount of work that would be required. At the time, UCAS were relaxed about the timescales. So we undertook an assessment in late October 2021, whereupon with UCAS terms of business, we have 3 months to reply and provide evidence. Due to some of the complexities of the analysis, we asked for a further extension to that, which UCAS agreed. So we submitted evidence to UCAS on the 1st of April, and they have subsequently came back looking for further clarification and a request for a meeting with our lead forensic scientist to discuss some of the analytical detail. For various reasons, that has taken a little bit longer than we had anticipated, and with the time-limited cases and things, it's the same resource and the same instrumentation that would be required to complete the work for the Lab 51 document. So there's a lot of activity ongoing to provide that assurance to UCAS. With regard to other organisations, it's not something that would be published, perhaps on the scope of accreditation, that there would be compliance to the Lab 51 document. UCAS have a suite of supporting documents that we have to comply to. Myself and my quality manager subscribe to a UCAS list, which we get updated, an email sent through of an update monthly. So if there are any draft documents that are for circulation and with impact forensic services, we do get sight of them and the opportunity, as with Lab 51, to feedback on those. And we are aware of when they are issued and they're controlled within our management system as well. So we have full sight of those documents that will impact the regulatory side of what we do.
So if that timeline has been something in the order of 18 months from that first publication to now, to the visit and the rest, I just wonder if there are any others in other areas that might have a similar impact. And just, I'm looking not for the detail, but I suppose the assurance that this is being considered and is in the planning.
Absolutely. Lab 51 has been probably one of the most detailed documents that UCAS have published for quite some time. And the analytical work that's required, it's quite unique in its nature. All the other documents are reviewed, gap analysis, and any changes implemented within the management system. But when there's significant validation in scientific activity, analytical activity, that's where it's slightly different from other documents. So we do have that assurance that we are aware of the other requirements upon the management system.
I think you're still working through this particular one. I'm just looking for an assurance, and you can come back perhaps later if you don't have at your fingertips, just if there are other things that other publications that might give rise to a significant amount of detail for the purposes of assessment, and making sure those are planned in.
If I could come back on that, Jane, I mean, there aren't any other areas of guidance of any significance that we're aware of at this moment in time that would have any impact across any other area of forensic services. So I can provide you with that assurance. The main area of focus for us moving forward, outside of obviously this guidance document, Lab 51 for toxicology, is around the new Forensic Science Regulators Code of Practice, and I think we're going to be discussing that in the October meeting of the committee.
Thanks very much for that, Jane. Fiona McQueen, you still have your hand up. Is that a legacy, or do you want to come back on something?
Sorry, Paul, it's a legacy.
That's
nicely
fine.
spotted.
Okay, I've got one or two quick questions on other things. So 2.1, you make reference to being an increase in the number of days for the turnaround of the service relating to violent crime, and I wonder if you can give us a bit more detail about this, like how much the increase in turnaround time is, and specifically in which areas.
Thank you, Chair. So this relates to the biology volume crime unit. So this unit deals with crime scene stains for a search against the database in an attempt to identify a suspect in a case. So the unit has a key performance indicator to turn around the majority of the work within 21 days. So Police Scotland have had a number of operations in place which have increased the demand into the volume crime unit, and that has had some impact on the more routine work that is done in that area, because those samples are prioritised to provide a faster turnaround time to support the Police Scotland investigations that will be going on. So with regards to the specific impact of that, I'll perhaps ask Helen Howarth to come in, who's the head of biology.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Fiona. So with the volume crime unit, we would routinely run anywhere between 400 and 410 cases per month. Given the increase that we have had, the increase in numbers hasn't been that great, but the increasing in turnaround time. So what we're having to do is we're having to turn those operation initiatives around in a shorter period of time, anywhere between sort of 7 and 14 days rather than 21. That obviously has impact on the running capacity within the unit, which is why the demand increased throughout the Q1. However, the team have done an excellent job, and now they are back to their old standard of anywhere I think we're nearly close to the 21 days now. So we were running at around about anything up to about 35 to 40. So we're pretty much back to the 21 days.
Great, thanks very much for that. The second question I've got is the next item down, 2.2, and you make reference in the last sentence to targeted improvements being planned. So I was just wanted to get a little bit more detail about some of the improvement work that's underway. What sort of things are we talking about here?
Yeah, so this is within our mark enhancement part of forensic services. So this is the units which we have based in Dundee and at the crime campus, who deal with the development of latent marks or fingerprints on productions, and also the recovery of DNA. So there has been an improvement plan in place within this area for a number of months. And again, I'll ask Helen to come in and provide some specific information with regards to what is happening within mark enhancement. Helen, please.
So obviously we were into a backlog situation due to COVID. We are only able to have a certain number of people within the laboratory during that time, which is why we had an increase in cases that weren't able to be completed. In conjunction with that, we had some increase in drugs work, and again, that mainly increased our demand. So what we have done is the team managers within that area have gone through and discussed with our partners to try to triage the cases and reduce the number of samples that are required to be analysed. That was one of the main objectives, and we have been fairly successful with that. Also, there's been quite a lot of work ongoing with looking at the numbers of cases that we have and trying to pick off the smaller cases to be able to reduce those quicker, and also to make sure that we are supporting the drugs department as well with getting cases through. So a lot of it is to do with triaging. We've got an additional 2 members of staff in the MEL unit within Dundee, and we are also looking to resource and have moved some resources around within the biology unit as well.
That's great, thanks very much. Any other questions on this? Okay.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, I
Fiona,
put my hand back up. Sorry.
Right. Fiona,
yeah, if I can
please.
And again, apologies for the not knowing. I think it's probably to do with the fact I'm a new committee member, and it may well be that you want to say, well, go away and we'll talk about it later. I'm interested in your strategic intent of how much spare capacity you run with. So how much flexibility would you have? So how much additional work can you routinely cope with in terms of the ebbs and flows of demand on the service, recognising it is expensive both in workforce but also capital?
Thanks, Fiona. So we've been doing work around our strategic workforce planning, and I think that takes us some way towards being able to answer your question. Broadly speaking, we don't have headroom in our capacity. It's fully utilised, and I think that is demonstrated through the backlogs that we have around certain areas of forensic services. Forensic science is an area where there are quite a lot of specialisms, and it's difficult to move resource between those areas. Our current operating model also puts in place some unnecessary structural boundaries between different parts of the organisation being able to offer support as we see peaks in demand. And that's one of the key tenets of the new operating model, where we're looking at those generalisms as opposed to the specialisms coming together, so that we have less of this sort of arbitrary split around scientific disciplines, and it allows us to multi-skill our staff so that we're able to be far more flexible and responsive to those peaks in demand. So that's one of the key benefits that we expect to see to come from the new operating model. It's really important that we also work on our demand forecasting, and that's an area that we're quite weak at the moment. And we need to work with colleagues in the Crown Office and Police Scotland to look at a more sophisticated way of being able to predict the future demand insofar as you can, so that we can make sure that the long lead-in times to develop expertise, if we take toxicology as an example, it takes a large number of years to train a toxicologist. So we need to be thinking as far ahead as possible so we can make some proactive decisions about growing our capacity in the right places moving forward.
And so that's really, really helpful. Thanks, Fiona. And the physical technical equipment, is that not as restrictive as the workforce?
We don't have any backlogs or bottlenecks within our processes in relation to instrument capacity at this particular point in time.
Great. Thank you, Fiona. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much for that. I'm going to move the business on. It's just an observation because you're about to move on to the performance framework, Fiona. But I think there was a desire expressed by members to perhaps have a little bit more colour and narrative in the performance report. So when you take the performance framework away to work up KPIs in the future, maybe that's something we can discuss a little bit more in the future to see if we can just get a bit more flesh on the bones. Okay, well, we're asked to note this item. That moves us then on to item number 4, which is the performance framework development, and it's a verbal update from a U director. So.
Thank you, Chair. So following previous discussions and building on what we've already talked about this afternoon, there is a recognised need for forensic services to present our performance in a more meaningful way, and that is a piece of work which we would intend to deliver by the end of this financial year. So the performance framework is very much around translating some of the statistics and management information that I've just shared with you through the performance report in a more meaningful way and linked to outcomes. And that requires us, I think, to work quite closely with our colleagues in Police Scotland in particular, and also the Crown, to look at how can we translate the meaning of some of the key performance indicators and some of the performance information in terms of keeping people and communities in Scotland safe. So how can we draw those links between what we are reporting, perhaps with regards to timeless information, the time from an incident to when a scene is attended? How can we translate that into something more meaningful and outcome focused for the committee and also for the public? So the performance framework will be developed over the coming months. I'm very keen to have board members involved within the development of that, to make sure that, particularly as the voice of the public, we can be clear that whether we're hitting the mark or not with regards to some of the really complicated information that we can provide from forensic services, but getting it into a fit shape where it is more meaningful both for the committee and then beyond the committee. So there will be some workshops which we would plan to pull together over the coming months, and I would be very keen to have members of the committee involved in those workshops so that we can make sure that we have a performance framework that is fit for purpose for forensic services, but also links in and to the Police Scotland performance framework. I'm very keen that we have greater alignment between the strategic outcomes of the forensic services strategy and the joint strategy for policing. And I think if we can draw those greater links, I think it would be really helpful for us to be able to see some of the dependencies across forensic services and Police Scotland and beyond.
Thanks very much for that update. Do we have any questions or comments on that? No. Okay, thanks for that. Then we'll note that and move on to item number, I think it's number 5, which is the change programme. And I think, Vicky, you are introducing that.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks,
Just in terms of the paper itself, section 1 gives you a bit of a background recap on the change programme itself, which is obviously pivotal to the delivery of our overarching strategy, as has already been mentioned today. So in terms of the change programme and the key projects within, these are outlined in 1.2 and 1.3, those being the new operating model project, access to laboratory services, deployment of scene examination, core operating system, and also data migration and governance projects, as well as from April this year, Project Weaver, which we can, there's further papers later on today. Just to call out a couple of aspects for information, section 2, the Forensic Services Strategy was obviously launched in September last year, so we have officially launched that internally earlier on this year in April across Forensic Services, and there's going to be further engagement with our partners in terms of the refresh strategy itself, particularly aligned to our new internet site, which is being developed at the moment. If we move on to section 7, the change programme update as a whole, we're remaining amber in terms of the RAG status, which is the same as the previous report. And outlined there, the rationale behind that is around the increased consultation time frame for that was originally planned for our operating model, the pausing of 2 projects because of resource availability, and also Project Weaver project plan amendments due to additional instrumentation implementation requirements. If we look at each of the projects in turn, the operating model, there's been significant progress since the last report. We are currently sitting at amber in terms of the RAG status. We've already mentioned the JNCC and the 41 new posts and the recruitment which has started there. But really a key milestone as well was a couple of weeks ago when we presented the outcome of the consultation for the majority of forensic services to the JNCC, with the final position being looked at and being presented to the JNCC in August, and obviously through the governance structure there too. In terms of the deployment of scene examination, this is sitting at an overall status of green. The decision has been made to locate the scene tasking unit at the Forensic Services Dundee location, which has been welcomed across the sites, across our staff internally and also with the trade unions. Access to laboratory services, again, is progressing well as a project that is green, and really this is a collaborative piece of work with Police Scotland and COPFS, and there's been positive feedback in terms of streamlined processes for the submission of casework into forensic services. In terms of data migration and governance, this is one of the projects that had been paused for a time because we did not have an allocated project manager. This is sitting at amber with the project now looking at a project brief being developed. That's in its initial draft stage, and there'll be further information coming to the Forensic Services Committee in October. And that's also the case for the Forensic Services Core Operating System, which looks at replacing our current evidence management system, our EMS. And again, we're looking at information coming back to the Forensic Services Committee in October with a full, an initial business case being provided. So that's sitting at red at the moment in terms of RAG status. In terms of Project Weaver, which is a transfer of the post-mortem toxicology services from the University of Glasgow to Forensic Services, the RAG is at Amber. The laboratory at Junction 24, Business Park and Govan is now being set up, and is the final stage of site works are being completed in parallel there, with installation of the main instruments is ongoing as well. Still on track for the transition of the service on the 1st of December this year. That's probably the key highlights of the report, but more than happy to take any questions.
Grant, thanks very much for that, Victoria. Do you have any questions? Jane.
Thank you, Vicky. Just on the almost big picture thing, I mean, you've got individual projects, you've identified the RAG status and indeed their role. Given the pressure on resources, and particularly given you said you'll be coming back in October, I just wonder how much contingency thinking we've been doing about what if the resource is not available, because I mean it has been problematic up until now. I do not think I think we all think it's not going to get any easier. So given this is where the pressures are, what has been the contingency thinking around that?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Really interesting question. And yes, I think we all identify that there are pressures from a budgetary perspective now and going forward. I think it's important to note that 4 of the key projects are very much in flight in terms of the operating model, the access to labs, scenes deployment, and obviously Project Weaver sitting separately. In terms of 2 of the projects, scene deployment and access to lab, are almost in that final phase of those in terms of implementation, the recruitment's ongoing, etc. And similarly with the operating model. Back to what Fiona Douglas mentioned earlier on, where we are working with our SPA colleagues and others to look at a workshop around, well, what does this mean? A lot of the benefits that we had articulated in the full business case for the operating model are very much dependent on the decisions there can impact what we will realise in the future. So it's around phasing, around timing, and looking at options there. So that work is ongoing, Jane.
But I suppose, to what extent is this within our control, forensics control, to phase and to implement, and to what extent is this dependent on the sort of service back arrangement, given you've identified the 41 posts were not change posts? Somewhere in the back of my mind, I had an idea that you either had or were bidding for 14 or more change posts, and how many of those are forensic science posts, and how many of them are Police Scotland providing support posts, or indeed SPA, but I don't think they're actually SPA.
Yeah, so we have around 14 Police Scotland resource, which have been identified to be part of our change programme. So that's, for example, Howard Kennett here is the programme manager, a senior programme project manager, project managers, business change analyst, all to make sure that projects are running efficiently and effectively and are delivering what they should be. It's very keen that we make sure that the benefits realisation pieces is continued as we move forward with the projects. So you're right, Jane, I think we do need to consider the wider piece here in relation to Police Scotland projects as well, but 4 are definitely, I would say, very much in flight.
Right, but so I think that's just flagging up that there is a possible risk, although Howard I think is on the call, and he might be putting his hand up to say complete assurance, but I'm not sure, Paul, how much
I was just about to bring Howard in there. His hand was up and down and up and down. So Howard, over to you.
Yeah, apologies for putting my hand up and down, up and down. I don't think anyone can have complete assurance at the moment as to what actually is going to happen within Police Scotland and within Police Scotland resources. What I will say is that if you think back to January, well, in fact, if you go to December, there were 4 members of Police Scotland supporting the programme. So it was very small, and actually since then we've grown to, I think we've got 14.5 at the moment. We've got one outstanding resource, which is a portfolio management officer. And when I was talking to the lead of the portfolio assurance, he said, or portfolio management office, Ian Smith said that he was looking to find us a portfolio officer because he can see the volume of work that we're doing and the amount of work that we've got. So people are really cognizant of the volume that we're actually doing and the need for it to continue. The difficulty is, I think there's a number of projects that they've got inside Police Scotland, and they are doing a prioritisation activity, of which we've had to supply information. But actually, I think we're in a reasonable position because we do not have police officers involved in our project and our programs. And that's where they're really feeling that big pinch, is if they've got a number of officers, so their core operating solution, for example, has lost its superintendent, chief inspector, and 3 inspectors. So therefore, they're really struggling, whereas we don't have that as a priority risk. So hopefully that doesn't give any assurance, but it actually kind of says, well, we're actually outside of the pensions issue. So we hopefully will be allowed to continue. I don't know if that helps, Jane.
And extremely interesting, reassuring, if not complete assurance. Yes.
Exactly. Sorry.
Thanks very much for that, Howard. I've got Katharina next.
Thank you very much for the presentation and really interesting discussion. I suppose my observation was that it is assuring to see that there are some elements of work that are progressing on track. However, I'm also mindful of the fact that at some stage the full business case would have probably had some assumptions there around all of the elements of the change program progressing at a certain pace. So now that we have 2 quite large chunks of the program being delayed, and they're not just, to me, they sit quite at the core, which is all around the core operating system, and the clue is in the name, and also the data migration. So I wonder, what are the dependencies on those 2 projects from other parts of the change program? And is there anything just in terms of the impact on the organizational ability to really progress, not just with the other parts of the change program, but also realize the benefits of that change? So are we seeing a delay there? Basically, what is the impact of the fact that the IT is delayed? Ultimately, that's kind of what I'm after.
Right, I see the director's hand. Are you wanting to come in at this stage, Fiona?
Yes, please, if I could answer that.
Sure.
Thanks for that question, Katharina. I think to some extent it's a benefit that the core operating system project in particular is running behind the operating model. I think it allows us to make sure that the requirements for the new operating system are fit for purpose as they should be for how we will be working in the future. So there are some benefits around that delay. The main issue, though, with regards to the delay within the core operating system is the efficiencies that would bring. The demand forecast as part of the strategic workforce plan shows us that if demand continues to increase as it has done over the previous 5 years, then we are going to need to have the new core operating system in place to offset that through the efficiencies that it will deliver. So I think that's the key piece for me. It's looking at the new operating model delivering the improvements in timeliness, but the growth in capacity to offset the increase in demand comes from the core operating system and the improved ways of working. So I think there's a positive and a negative within that, but it's certainly an absolutely key project that we need to progress. And we would hope to bring the initial business case around what that looks like to the next Forensic Services Committee meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Are you happy with that, Katharina?
I mean, absolutely. It's my mind just, I think, Fiona, your explanation makes absolutely perfect sense. So to some degree, you have confirmed a concern, which is around the fact that it will take us longer to realize some of the benefits. So, and I appreciate we will get to see the business case when it's ready in due course, and I understand the reasons for the delay. But do you have any indication in terms of the timeline as to, I mean, if it's too early to say at this stage, it's too early to say, but I'm concerned about just the impact and the timeline, that's the new timeline.
I mean, I share some of those concerns, particularly as time progresses, demand increases, and therefore we start to see the pressure of that. And we don't want to increase backlogs in areas and to see risk associated with that. It is a lengthy project in terms of any IT project to make sure you get it right. And I think we've experienced within forensic services of trying to bring ICT project in too quickly and then having to reap the consequences of that in the future. So it's important that we plan that out carefully. There is a broader discussion to be had around the availability of capital and funding with regards to the core operating system, and I believe that we'll be discussing that later on in the meeting in the private session.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Caroline.
Thanks. My question was kind of similar to Katerina's, but I'll build on it slightly. Just in terms of when all these plans were put together, I mean, this was always a big complex project, and so yeah, it is complex to deliver. I always have concerns about that kind of timeframes. But since we put all these plans together and started implementing them, we're now in a world of flat cash. And the net of flat cash in a few years' time means that we will be between 15 and 30% smaller, depending on how inflation runs, etc., etc. And that means that, you know, building up to the levy, you know, being able to do more demand, etc. The point, really, I think this is where we need to kind of go back to drawing board a wee bit to start modelling some of that flat cash kind of what that actually means for our business. Because if it does mean that we're 15, 20, 25% smaller, then, you know, what does that mean in terms of demand? How do we manage that? You know, there's a whole big question in my head that we were building up to a levy before on the fact that our money was going to keep going up and up. That's not happening now. So there has to be some kind of resetting of expectations, and I think that should be reframing the projects. So I would like to see, I know you're going to be doing that work, I would quite like to see the output of that, because I think that might just help us reframe some of these projects. I don't think there's any point steaming ahead on big complex things that we might not need or afford or whatever going forward. So I just think this, for me, it's just that, and it's such a shame because I know all the hard work to get you to where we were going, but I just think some of the core assumptions have now changed, and we just can't carry on with the assumptions as they were on which these cases were built. And that, for me, it would be a good pause, especially when looking at things that we're well behind on anyway, just, you know, like the operating systems, everything, just to pause them and maybe some of these things just to kind of think, are we still on the right track? Because I'd rather we kind of took that time and then did it in the right way so that we progressed and got something that really is fit for purpose that we can afford as well. Thanks, that would be my general comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Not sure there's any question there that you need to come back on, Fiona. Okay, I've got Andrew Hendry. You want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've come in at the end, which is advantageous because I think most of my points have been covered. I suppose the only point I was going to make was just around the prioritisation. So, you know, obviously from a central perspective in resource management, we're well aware of forensics ambition and demand. So hence we've been very supportive of the resourcing models. You know, I think the prioritisation, what is ongoing, it's going to obviously have implications for everyone. And to Caroline's point, I think the future cost of operating the organisation is going to be actually shaping our ambition in regards to transformation more than anything. So the prioritisation, that's ongoing just now includes forensics in that scope. And after we've done a draft review, we're going out to the directors, and in this case also Fiona, for a discussion. And then after that, we'll then feature that into wider transformation plans and thereafter resource planning. I think to Kenneth's point, I think the implications for forensics immediately are less, but there still is the market condition impact on resourcing that obviously affecting all organisations, and that's something again that we're including as a vector within our prioritisation work. So yeah, just to assure members of that. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I'm conscious of time. I've got just a couple of very quick questions. I've got a number of other questions, but I'm just going to limit it to a couple of very quick ones. 8 for data migration and governance. Can we get an idea of why benefits and finances are assessed in red?
Yes, thanks, Paul. Howard, would you mind coming in on that aspect from a financial RAG status?
Yeah. Sorry. The work that we've just started back off for data migration and governance is looking at what actually will be the benefits that come out of it. So therefore that work has actually only just started, which is why I've put it into red.
Right.
So that's really the reason that we're there. We need to identify what the benefits will be. There are significant benefits. Some of them are legislative, and therefore there's a potential risk, but there's a lot of work going on around to actually sort that out. But at the moment, that's the financial reason, is the fact that we don't really know what the cost of mitigation will be, and we don't know what the benefit piece and the benefit position will finally be. So
Right.
I hope that helps.
Okay, thanks. No, that is helpful. And I think, I mean, there's a clutch of these that are reds, and I'm assuming it's timing that, you know, of various markers throughout the paper, and it's because of the nature of the timing. They're not things that have gone way off kilter.
No, that's right.
Okay.
Sorry, because we've had to reassess some of the planning activity, particularly around the consultation timescales being longer than we initially anticipated.
Yeah.
That's why that's seen as red in some locations.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, I'll pull the rest of my questions, which were kind of touching on that kind of line, because I'm conscious we're slipping behind schedule, and I'm not usually bad at keeping to time. So that's the Forensic Services Change Programme update. I'm just checking for recommendations here, if you bear with me. I'm all thumbs today. I'm just scrolling down to recommendations if I can find them. So we're asked to note the progress of the Forensic Services Change Programme. So if we can do that, great. That then moves us on to item 6, which is demonstrating value. And that's you again, Director.
Thank you, Chair. So just to provide a brief update to members following on from the last committee meeting, the short life working group around value met for the first time on the 27th of May, and was very grateful for Jane Ryder's support in terms of chairing that discussion. We had a good representative group of people from Police Scotland, including Digital Forensics, CIPA, the Leverhulme Institute, and also Forensic Services, a number of colleagues within Forensic Services. We had a good discussion on a range of areas which are set out in 2.8 within the paper, looking at the presumption of value, looking at how there are different measures of value, particularly around the speed at which the science is provided, as well as the type of science and the contribution that it makes, looking at what value is added currently and what the potential value could be in the future, and then looking at how things could be started or stopped depending on their contribution within that. We had an excellent discussion really around how we can look at value through different lenses, particularly interested to hear some of the work done by Leverhulme around a range of different forensic science topics that they've held a number of strategic conversations about. And I think that there's a real opportunity to use that type of methodology here to really think about how forensic science contributes to different stakeholders within the process. Very careful to think through the capacity to be able to progress this work at the current point in time with everything else that's going on. It is a particularly busy period now and over the coming 12 months. So keen to be realistic in what we can achieve with regards to progressing this piece of work around value. And I think in particular, we identified a need to focus in particularly on one type of crime, to look at if we could make some meaningful conclusions from the work and the discussions which could be held. And I think we settled on looking at sexual offences and the contribution of forensic science in the investigation of sexual crime really is one of the key areas to consider, looking at understanding and mapping the process, and then particularly focusing on areas of convergence where you've got multiple agencies coming together at different points in the process, the key decisions that are made, and then the downstream consequences of that and how that can be measured. Therefore, what's proposed within this paper is that we will progress to a workshop to dig into some of those particular areas, and the Leverhulme Institute kindly offered to facilitate that workshop, and I think that will be really good at identifying ways that we can apply a methodology to measure value, but also ways that we can look at how in particular forensic science contributes to the investigation of sexual crime now and how it could in the future. So proposing that we bring the output of that work and the workshop and any subsequent work through to a committee meeting next year.
Great, thanks very much for that. Jane, were you wanting to add anything to this, noting your involvement in this?
No, that's a very good summary of a good discussion, which is a culmination of some thinking. I mean, those who've been following this for some time may remember it started off as an almost mathematical scientific how can we prove value, but actually we've moved, and I think the really important thing for me probably of all of those things is that identification of different lenses, so that we are looking not just internally but the different lenses and therefore the different impact, which is where value, and certainly this sort of aligns with what it was somewhat before, not a long time before, but I think it's not dissimilar, I think, to the methodology that HMICS might be bringing to bear on toxicology. So there may well be lessons to be learned from that, which I think will be valuable. But Fiona is, the director, is quite right that we need to be aware of the capacity, and we adjudged it was much more sensible to wait until next year, not try and launch into something now, which I think would have been particularly taxing. And I hope that by the time we come to do that, as it happened, there wasn't anyone from the Crown Office with us, but I'm sure that they will certainly be invited again, and I hope that they can assist.
Great, thanks for that. Fiona McQueen.
Thanks, Chair. And Fiona, obviously I've not been part of the journey of the intellectual philosophical discussion, and this is probably slightly not within your scope, but I think we probably discussed it when we met. I think in terms of the added value to Scottish society, I think there's something about women and girls in science and engineering that's that kind of wider. So as part of your equality strategy, what is it that can be done that would both attract women into science, but also, even if you're not having a recruitment issue, it's actually just showcasing the brilliant work that forensics does and whets girls' appetites into science in perhaps a more interesting way than a Bunsen burner and some whatever. And then the other aspect, and again, I guess there would be data protection issues and all sorts, and you maybe do it already, but I'm thinking about Public Health Scotland and drug driving. So we have a source of knowing and understanding the range of drugs, and you've listed them, I think, later on, that people who suffer a drug's death have in their body, but actually, other than that, we're not really aware of other, from a scientific perspective. So the drug driving work maybe has a potential, and I recognise it's out with your scope and it may be too difficult, but I'm just putting it out there that it from a public health point of view, you may already be there, or it may be helpful to reflect and think about how that could contribute. And again, recognising the pressure you're under, not necessarily a quick win and a thing for immediate action.
Sure, if I could come back on that. I mean, I absolutely would agree that we have a huge amount of drugs intelligence information within forensic services. The power of intelligence is greatest when it is fresh. And one of our key challenges is reducing backlogs so that we can produce as close to real-time intelligence as we can, which is particularly important when considering public health related issues. Because there is a real opportunity, I think, for us to make a really positive contribution in terms of particular drugs that come on the market that are harmful to drug users. And I think there's a real opportunity there for us to do more. I think once we have the post-mortem toxicology service under our roof, so to speak, then that pulls together the full picture of drugs across Scotland, and we have that full picture of the toxicology analysis in terms of the drugs that are found within people. And also the picture of the drugs identification, which is, you know, a huge amount of substances which are being analysed annually. So it gives us the opportunity again to have that really rich picture of intelligence, which would be able to contribute across a range of different areas, but particularly around public health. Coming back to your original point around women and girls in science and STEM, there are a number of people within the organisation that are regularly involved in various different activities within forensic science and within forensic services in particular. We actually have a predominantly female workforce, and we have actually been doing some initiatives with regards to encouraging boys and men to enter into biology in particular, which is an area that's very predominantly female, but absolutely keen to look at the improving the diversity of forensic science in general. And I think a key avenue to do that would be around us looking at apprenticeships and around sponsored and partnership degrees. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to diversify forensic services workforce around underrepresented groups, but also more broadly in terms of diversity of thought and to give different opportunities and routes into forensic science.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, and don't knock Bunsen burners or things of beauty. So anyway, if we can note that and move on to the next item, which is, bear with me, item number 7, biometrics. So again, that's you, Director.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just very, very quickly introduce this paper, which is provided for information and assurance. But this paper really sets out some of the groups and methods that are in place with regards to enabling the governing principles that are set out in 2.3 of that document. So Forensic Services is very much concerned with biometrics data, how it's collected, stored, used and retained to ensure that it's for specified and lawful purposes, that we make sure that the data that is collected and stored adheres to legal requirements, so particularly talking around DNA, fingerprints, and that we make sure that there are steps throughout our processes that are taken to ensure the accuracy, security and integrity of biometrics data. And that we've got transparency around error rates and any uncertainties inherent within our procedures, that those procedures are robust and conform to relevant standards, including the new biometrics regulators codes of practice, and that those processes are audited, that the intrusion into private lives should be minimised, and particularly around the issues around biometrics and issues of data linkage. And the paper really sets out the close collaborative working between forensic services and our colleagues in Police Scotland in particular around how we utilise biometrics data. There's a lot of handovers and shared use of data across the different organisations, and there has been a huge amount of work over the past few years to ensure that we've got good robust processes and systems in place to make sure that we are meeting those principles and that we are ready for the introduction of the Biometrics Commissioner's Code of Practice. I'm happy to take any questions on the paper.
Great, thanks very much for that. Before throwing it open to other members for questions, I've got 1 or 2 questions myself. So the first thing is on 2.6, I think the paper states that forensic services are engaged with the Office of the Biometrics Commissioner, but it doesn't highlight whether the Commissioner has provided any feedback or guidance to forensic services. So have they done that yet?
We have worked with the new Biometrics Commissioner to develop some of the initial documentation. So that office is fairly new. The Code of Practice is due to be published in the next few months. So not at this stage, Paul. I think once the Code of Practice is in place, then we would be seeking to report our compliance back through the committee and also to the Biometrics Commissioner.
And has there been any external audit or assurance activity on this?
With the external audit that we already have from UCAS through our standard ISO 17025 accreditation includes inspection in relation to these matters.
Great. And the next one is 2.7, the Police Scotland approach. Reference is made to engagement with their Chief Data Officer, but no mention of data ethics framework in the report. So is there anything more about that? Is there an opportunity for example, for further integration with the UK biometrics database put through the data ethics framework?
We work with Police Scotland through the biometrics governance groups with regards to the linkage between data ethics and the biometrics group. So perhaps ask ACC Smith to come in and provide some additional information with regards to that.
Right.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Chair. I did sneak my hand up there to come in. Just, I suppose, to reassure you, I chair the Biometrics Oversight Board and I'm the biometrics data owner for Police Scotland, and we're really well linked in with Fiona's team, but also in terms of data governance, data ethics. We have a regular, I have a monthly catch up in terms of biometric data. There's a lot that I would like to do moving forward, but as you rightly point out, we have to make sure we go through the appropriate kind of ethics and governance and audit process and structures. I'm really well linked in with the Biometrics Commissioner. I have a catch up with him every quarter just around kind of proposals and plans in terms of moving forward with that. So I'm quite kind of confident that we're linked in around that, but also really cognizant of the human rights aspects and making sure that we get that right. Happy to take any questions if anyone's got anything in relation to that.
Well, I've not got any in relation to that, but I've got one more question before I hand on to Caroline, and it's 2.19, which is relating to the desire to have greater independent control over Scottish biometric data on national systems. And it then goes on to say there's been weeding of Scottish fingerprint records from the UK database. And I'd just like to know to what end, because I don't understand why if a Scots person goes down south and commits a crime and leave their fingerprints all over the place, why you wouldn't want the Met, for example, to be able to access those fingerprints. So can someone maybe explain a little bit more about this?
I'll have a stab, Paul, and then I'll maybe ask Gary to come in because this is quite a complex area. But broadly speaking, what we're talking,
regretted asking it.
we are talking here is making sure that the fingerprints that are held on the Ident1 fingerprint database are compliant with the Scottish legislation, so that as and when they should be removed from that database, they are weeded, is the terminology which we use, off Ident1. Now, at the moment, the weeding for Scottish records has to happen in England, because there's a link between the fingerprint database and the PNC, which is obviously not the system which we use within Scotland, but it's fundamental to the working of the fingerprint Ident1 database. So there's a link there that means we have been unable to undertake that weeding in Scotland. So we are reliant upon the England to weed the Scottish part of the records database. So there's a process in place to allow us to have the appropriate access to the PNC, which is quite a unique arrangement, so that we can then facilitate the weeding of Scottish records off the Scottish part of the Ident1 fingerprint database, allowing us to own that process and our compliance with the legislation within Scotland. Gary, is that correct?
I don't think I could put it better myself, Fiona. There, the spot on.
Thank you.
I think it's been a very difficulty for a number of years. So we've done a hell of a lot of work to get to this point, and a lot of support from ACCs down south of the border as well. And we're in the final stages of that and testing it. So we've made great progress here. So it's a big success point, this, because it's been a problem for a number of years.
And when you talk about Scottish records, those are records collected in Scotland as distinct from a Scots person down south being fingerprinted.
Yes, yeah, it's all related to the. Obviously, we use criminal history system in Scotland as the main system. Obviously, in England and Wales, they use PNC, so that's where it comes from. And yet, Ident1 was built around basically the records from PNC, and we've got an indirect link, I suppose, with CHS to PNC. So this is really to sort that out, and obviously more strategically going forward, we've got work with the Home Office to make sure this is covered in the next version, because PNC is going to be phased out in a few years' time. So there's a programme of work going on with that, and we're heavily involved in that with Police Scotland.
Right. And there's no unintended consequences with this that we know of?
No.
Great. Caroline.
Thanks, Chair. And I suppose just building on what you were asking there, I guess my first question was really when I was reading the paper, is there any kind of time frame for this? Just sort of in terms of when is that code of conduct going to come out, when's compliance going to be due with it, you know, because these are big projects. I mean, they are big complex projects. So is there any idea?
I've not got the timescales off the top of my head for you, Caroline. I believe that the code of practice is to be issued within the next 2 months.
Right.
In terms of when we would be reporting compliance against it, I don't have that timetable to hand at this particular point, but I can confirm that after the meeting.
Smashing. Thanks, Fiona. And my second question was really, and it's probably more one for Andrew Henry if he's still on. It was only when I was reading this and I kind of thought in principle, and it might be that it's just different because it's different systems, etc. But in principle, it sounded very much like digital evidence sharing, which is obviously the project that's going with the Crown. And I just wondered, is there any similarity there? And is there any economy of scale that would get us there faster or cheaper or better? I just wondered, Andrew, if there was anything there in that, or am I completely off piste and they're completely different things? Which there may be.
Chair, I'll come in if that's okay, just Caroline's
Please do.
question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Caroline. You know, it's a good challenge and it's certainly something that's been thought of in the way of design. I mean, Desk also has a customer base, obviously, within forensics as well. So I think it's part of the DDICT refresh that's ongoing now, which forensics is part of the scope of. That's certainly where I think the architecture will kind of pull that out. But I certainly think from an application and data layer perspective, there's definitely something there. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, it's just in the world of, you know, less money, you know, and is there any opportunities for economies of scale here? But anyway, that's great. I think that'd be good news if we could do that. Yep.
Yeah, I've got Fiona next, and then I'm keen to move the business on. So Fiona.
Okay, thanks.
Fiona McQueen.
Just a quick question for Fiona Douglas. 1.4, you talk about the other 3 countries. Do the other 3 countries have the same problem as us, or is it different legislation?
I'm just scrolling back to 1.4. So they don't have the same problem because they all use PNC.
All right. Okay.
So that's the fundamental difference why Scotland has a different set of issues around the ident1 databases because of the link with CHS. So effectively, without going into the technical detail, you have to create a dummy record on the PNC. So it just creates a lot of complexity in the system.
No, that's grand. Thank you.
Okay, we're asked to note this report. Can I move us then on to item 8, the refresh 2-year business plan? And again, that's you, Director.
Thank you, Chair. So just very briefly in summary of this paper, this has been developed, the new business plan has been developed from the refreshed forensic strategy, builds on also the wellbeing survey results and also the wider organisational priorities from extensive work, which the change programme in itself is built around. So there are a number of activities that have been highlighted as priorities for the next 2 years that are highlighted in the document. This does still need to be translated into a plan with timescales associated with it, which I will bring back to the next Forensic Services Committee meeting alongside a review of our performance against the previous 2-year business plan. But I'm happy to take any questions on the activities highlighted within the report.
Thanks. Jane.
Thank you. I think it may therefore be, sorry, I'm having a camera problem.
Okay.
It may be that you can deal with this when you do bring it. I mean, it was a refreshed business plan to implement the strategy. Absolutely no problem at all with that. I mean, my question was, what's the difference and from the original? But if you're bringing back to us an analysis of the past, that will be helpful. I wondered if it was just the KPIs, and the KPIs I think may be even the most important aspect of the refreshed business plan. But I mean, as it stands, yes, but it's the so question, I think. So what will this mean? But I look forward to seeing a genuine plan as opposed to a plan for a plan. I think this is a plan for a plan.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but those questions will all be addressed. Jane, I think we have made quite a lot of progress since the last 2-year business plan was published, and a number of those areas have been completed. And I think it's important that we dwell on the areas that we've completed, as well as the areas that are outstanding and the areas that we now know that we need to progress.
But the last business plan, just for clarity, over the last 2 years, or at least certainly back in historic time, I mean, since we've just approved the new strategy, the new business plan will reflect the new strategy. The old business plan must have reflected the old strategy.
Yes, that's correct. But there obviously is a progression between the two that I need to highlight and bring that forward for you in the next report.
Okay, so it's the transition journey, and that would be interesting. Thank you.
Caroline.
Just a quick follow-on to that, and thanks, Fiona, for the paper. And it's in light of my last comments, I suppose, in relation to, things have changed, fundamentally for that cash. And so the chair was quite saying to ask a question. Well, I'm going to ask a question now. So I guess, when are we going to see, I suppose, those revised forecasts in terms of what that looks like? Because that will obviously feed into this plan, feed into the strategy, etc. So I guess, do you have a date for that in terms of when we're going to see the impact of flat cash coming through?
So the first part of that, from my perspective, is the workshop with the accountable officer, which will happen this month, and then the scenarios planning piece of work that we need to do then around that. We need to do it fairly quickly, because we need to make sure that we don't make any decisions this year that then put that unnecessary pressure on next year's budget. So there are some fairly quick decisions that do need to be made. So I would hope that I will have a fairly clear picture on that for you for the next committee meeting.
Great, thanks, Fiona.
I don't think I said don't ask a question. I may have thought it, but I didn't say it.
No, well, you said I hadn't asked a question, and you were
right,
right, because I just kind of made a general statement around my concerns. But I've asked a question now.
Yeah, the general thing is that we're getting this coming back in a month or a couple of months' time anyway. So there's been more scope, I think, to tease it out in more detail at that stage anyway. So anyway, all questions are good. Right, I'm going to suggest then we pick up the pace a bit and move on to the next agenda item. So we're noting the fresh 2-year business plan, and we've got a commitment to come back. Is it October, Fiona?
Yes.
Right, so that will be popped into the action plan for the October meeting. That then moves us on to drug driving update, which is one of the big reports that we've got to discuss today. So Fiona, I think you're introducing this, aren't you? Oh no,
that'll
it's
be Alistair.
Alistair, over to you, Alistair.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Fiona. So I'll take my report as read, but I'll pull out a few of the key points just in the way through, if that's okay. So the introduction of a new offence in Scotland in October 2019 set specific drug driving limits for 17 specific drugs. The change was part of the Scottish Government's programme of government in 1920. The legislation enacted allows police to carry out a roadside mouth swab to test for cannabis or cocaine on any motorist they suspect of drug driving or who has been involved in an accident or stopped for a traffic offence. Where there's a positive test or a motorist fails a field impairment test, the police can request a blood sample for testing and analysis. The examination process to detect and quantify drugs has a high degree of complexity when compared with the more traditional drink driving analysis. Since the new offence was introduced in Scotland, there's been a significantly higher demand for testing and analysis of blood samples than initially forecast. As a result of this sustained demand, the caseload has remained at an elevated level, although is reducing steadily. Since the last committee meeting in April, outsourcing of Section 5A cases has continued. As a result of the high level of demand, the impact of this reached a point where 386 cases could not be progressed to prosecution, having reached the current statutory 12-month time limit. The Scottish Government has agreed to fund a further £370,000 of outsourcing this year, which will further improve the position in relation to drug driving. As mentioned earlier, the Forensic Services Target Operating Model project makes provision for an increase in capacity for toxicology services. Forensic Services have received approval to commence the recruitment process for additional toxicology staff associated with that project, and 8 posts are being advertised currently. Toxicology staff continue to work tirelessly and remain committed to processing cases in a timely fashion, and we're working closely with Police Scotland, the Crown and the Scottish Government to manage and minimise risks and to develop a longer-term sustainable solution to meet future demand. And I think that was everything that I want to say in my opening remarks, so happy to answer any questions.
Right. Thanks very much, Alistair. It would be hugely helpful if we could start with you perhaps giving an explanation of the process from roadside to court, for example, just very high level for the benefit of new committee members, but also this is the public part of the session. There may be people tuning in that aren't immersed in this. So perhaps if you could maybe just quickly talk us through that, what the sequence of events are and where the bottlenecks are as well would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So broadly speaking, at a high level, Police Scotland would stop a vehicle and carry out a roadside saliva test. If that's a positive test, forensic medical staff would take a blood sample. Police Scotland would then prioritise and make the request for analysis and send the sample to the lab for the subsequent analysis. We would receive the request and the sample. An aliquot of the sample would be removed and frozen or refrigerated to prevent degradation. And then analysis would be undertaken. So first of all, that would involve extraction of samples and then running the samples in batches. There's then data processing and checking. A report would be produced, which is then sent to our customer. So Police Scotland. Police Scotland would then report the case to the Crown, and the Crown would progress the case. So at a high level, I think that probably covers the end-to-end process. In relation to your follow-up question there about the bottlenecks. So the main bottleneck that we've got at the moment is in terms of reporting the cases. As we said earlier, it's a very, very specialised area, and we're looking to develop the reporting capacity within the toxicology team. But that would be the main bottleneck at the moment in terms of reporting.
So and in reporting, what we mean by that is the outputs from the scientific instruments, and it's the scientists that are looking at those results, interpreting those, and producing the reports that then go to the Procurator Fiscal, so they can then proceed with prosecution.
Yes, that's correct. It's the scientists that interpret the results with the reams of paper and produce the report for subsequent forwarding.
As distinct from was it up to a dozen samples that goes through the instruments? So, for example, the physical asset of the instrument is being worked enough. Even if you were to work 24 hours a day using that asset, it's not going to make a difference because the bottleneck is enough people to interpret what's coming out of that.
Yes, that's broadly correct. So the main bottleneck is at the reporting stage. So we could run more and more batches, but we would still have the same or a larger bottleneck.
Okay, right. Do any other board members have any questions at this stage? No. Katharina.
Yes, no, thank you very much for this explanation. I was just wondering in terms of the processing of samples that come in, so on what basis are they processed? Is it like first in, first out of samples, or how are they prioritized for processing? What's the methodology around that?
Okay, thanks for your question there. That's a very good question. So under normal circumstances, if you would like, it would be first in, first out, with the exception of any cases which require to be prioritised. So the priority request would come from either the Crown or Police Scotland. So the priorities would be received, and we would adapt our testing requirements to meet those priorities.
Okay, are you happy with that, Katharina, or do you want to follow up?
Maybe just to understand,
Please, yeah.
and you might not have the data available, but in terms of priority requests, what percentage is on an average kind of daily processing or weekly processing? What is the percentage of priority requests versus the non-priority requests? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't have a sense of the figure involved in that, I'm afraid. There certainly be a number of priority requests being received, so the number would be higher than normal, but I don't have a percentage that I can give you, but I'll try and find out if that would be okay.
The director wants to come in at this point.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't have the specific answer to that question, Katharina, but certainly we would prioritise cases in conjunction with roads policing and with Police Scotland, particularly where they involve repeat offenders, for example, or fatalities or serious incidents. Where we are at the moment with regards to the age of the caseload, if we do receive cases in that for whatever reason have been delayed prior to submission, those cases would also be prioritised. So at the current point in time, it's quite a disruptive way of working because we need to ensure that cases don't meet this exceed the statutory time limit. So there is probably a lot more prioritisation that is happening at the moment to make sure that that doesn't happen than there would ordinarily be. But we do prioritise cases in accordance with whatever police and Crown would request as a matter of routine. There are just to mention, there are also other types of toxicology analysis that come into that unit outside of the drugs driving cases. So the unit would also deal with other types of criminal toxicology work, as well as spiking cases, for example. So all of those cases have their own priorities associated with them as well. So the unit will look at the best way of prioritising the runs on the instruments to make sure that they're meeting the target dates for cases, as well as ensuring, as far as we possibly can, that no cases exceed the statutory timeframes.
Jane.
And just following up on that, how does this link with the gateway?
It doesn't, Jane, is the short answer, because these cases do not go through the forensic gateway.
Okay, that's very helpful to know. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone on this? So what we're doing about this, we have a member of, a short life working group looking at this that I'm currently chairing, and we had the first meeting of that last week. And I think there's discussions to be had with the Crown Office and with Police Scotland about again, how we take this forward. So you've highlighted the aspects relating to outsourcing and to recruitment. Is there anything else you think needs to be added at this stage? Alistair.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things to mention there in terms of improvements. So as you would expect with an organisation that embeds continuous improvement approach, both SPA and Police Scotland, we're looking at process mapping of the processes, trying to identify any waste that is within there and eliminate or reduce as far as possible. We've got a business analyst who is working on that with us. The additional outsourcing is going to help greatly there. The additional staffing we've talked about in terms of the target operating model. The new contract for outsourcing will offer an additional level of flexibility, which will assist us as well. And in terms of operational improvements, there's a whole raft of improvements ongoing of different magnitudes, if you like. Again, looking to reduce or eliminate some of the difficulties in the system. So hopefully that will add some additional context there. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just for the public record, we're really committed to trying to get this issue resolved as quickly as we possibly can. Director.
Yeah, just to add to that, we have the Gold Group established that is chaired by ACC Smith, and also then the Silver Operation Hitch Improvement Group that sits beneath that. So that's looking across all of the partners across the whole system at ways that we can look to make improvement and manage the current risk. And I think it's important to note the tireless work that's been going on across Police Scotland and the Crown Office with regards to managing this situation and in ensuring that cases are prioritised and extraordinary measures are taken by all partners within this process to make sure that we minimise any further cases that do exceed the statutory timeframe. But certainly colleagues in roads policing are definitely going above and beyond in terms of how we can address this issue, and really close collegiate working relationships across all of the different organisations involved with this.
Good, because we certainly don't want this to be repeated in the future, and we want to do our very best to resolve this as quickly as we can. Okay, I don't see any more hands up. We've got someone here from the Crown Office. I don't know if you're wanting to make any comment on this or at this stage.
Ruth McQuaid here.
Welcome.
Yes, hi. Nothing particular to add to what's already been said. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, if we can then note the position, and we'll get further reports on this going forward. That moves us then on to item 10, which is the Forensic Services Financial Report, Monitoring Report. And again, that's you, Director.
Thank you, Chair. So not too much to comment on with regards to this report. The Q1 expenditure forecast is in line with budget. The overall revenue budget for forensic services of 40.8 million for the year. There is a 0.4 million underspend in staff, which is really in relation to some of the delays with the senior management team restructure and a slightly different profile around existing salary costs. We do have a £500,000 overspend around non-pay costs, the majority of which is in relation to the post-mortem toxicology and drugs driving toxicology analysis. Capital spend is in line with budget. We are on track at this point in time to spend our capital allocation over the financial year. Likewise, from reform, the 0.9 million allocation of reform funding, again, we're on track and in line with our budget spend year to date in that regard. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Do we have any questions from anyone at this stage? I don't see any. Okay, well, we're asked to note this, which will then move us on to the committee work plan. Again, that's me. We've now actually got SPA officer support, which has been really helpful. So I wonder if I might sit down with them and look at how to make the work plan a bit more meaningful and capture some of the actions that I think are appropriate. So I'll maybe take that away with our officers going on. Caroline.
Thanks, Chair. It was just a quick comment on the work plan, because I had a look at it, because this agenda today has been very heavy, and the one in October is equally heavy. But I'm kind of minded that we have some very big projects coming in kind of in November, start of December for go live. And I just wondered, because the next one's not due till February, if we should maybe consider having another committee meeting in the early December.
Well, the board chair is of the view that we don't meet often enough, and on the back of today, I'm inclined to agree with them. So what I'd like to do is consult with other board members, with the board members on this and the director, to see if that's possible. So because if another meeting to sweep up some of the other business, I think would be quite helpful. And I actually think between April and today was too big a gap as well.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
But hindsight's a wonderful thing. So yeah, I think your point's well made. Okay, if we've got no other queries on that, can I suggest then that we take a comfort break here? That's the end of the public session. We've got a private session. And if we take a 5-minute comfort break, allow people to fill up the kettles and powder their noses. And we'll see you back here at 5 past.